Welcome to day 6, visual hierarchy. It's our introduction to user experience design course, and I'm excited to get going on this. So in the product design cycle, we are still working in the prototyping phase. Once you have worked through ideas and the deciding power of your organization has bought off on a design direction and a vision for your product, we move into the prototyping phase and the design phase. At this point, you begin putting frames around the ideas generated in the ideation phase. There's a lot of overlap between ideation and prototyping and testing. Usually a mini cycle happens where ideas are created and made physical through drawings or prototypes, and then tested with users and evaluated by peers, and then the cycle repeats itself until the best possible product is created or your budget and time run out. And that's usually the case. Designs are finalized and after these iterative mini cycles and then turned over to the development team for development. Since our focus is on user experience of digital products, let's take some time to talk about the user interface, that digital manifestation of our ideas. When learning interface design, it's important to understand some fundamentals about visual hierarchy. First, size. The larger something is, the more importance it has in visual hierarchy. So you can use size as a way to let people know what it is that you want them to look at. Generally speaking, the largest thing on the page is what attracts the most attention and gets looked at first. Photos tend to draw the eye more than text or other elements on the page. So if you have text and photos that are roughly the same size, the photo is likely to get the first glance. But an extremely large headline will get glanced at before a relatively smaller photo. Color and contrast can also be used. Contrast is a tool that we use to make one object stick out compared to another. More than just color, contrast is speaking about tonality and vibrancy. Black on white offers the largest contrast. The greater the contrast between an element and its background, the more important it seems. You can also use spacing in your consideration of visual hierarchy. White space is one way to use contrast and spacing. White space is not literally always white. It refers to an area around an object. It is also referred to as ground in the phrase figure and ground. So you can see in this example, the figures are the dark areas and the ground is the light space behind it. So this spacing is called white space. Generally speaking, the more white space around an object, the more attention it receives and the more important it seems, even if it's small. So the above example, by using location, which is at the top of the page, and then that generous amount of white space, those three small objects seem much more important than some of the bigger things down the page. We use proximity to help group related information and imagery together. By grouping things, we can call attention and lend importance to all the elements that might otherwise seem unimportant. So by nesting a headline next to a large image, the headline might still be relatively small, but we understand its role and importance by its proximity to the image. Using proximity, we're really also guiding the eye around the page. Here's an example of groupings of these objects together to help them feel related to each other and help us generate which is the most important on the screen. Composition is how the page or screen is laid out. It uses size, contrast, and spacing rules to create a flow or a sense of interest. Failing to thoughtfully consider a page composition opens the door for confusion and chaos. Those things don't automatically happen, but if you are thoughtful, it's very easy to prevent chaos or confusion in your users. So let's consider a few things that help guide composition decisions. Symmetry. Many untrained designers tend to design with symmetry automatically. That is centering objects, making things even, making objects on the left and the right match each other in size and spacing. Symmetry is not bad, but it tends to be less engaging than other compositions. There's certainly a place for symmetry in design, and we see it used a lot, and you should always keep it in your toolkit. But also it's harder to use in interaction design because it makes path through a page more difficult to find and follow. And oftentimes in interaction design, we want to have a path for people to follow that's very clear. The rule of thirds is used to add interest to a composition, and it is simple to remember and powerful in its use. The rule of thirds just means that if you were to divide a page or your screen by 2 vertically evenly spaced lines and then 2 horizontally evenly spaced lines, you would place your element of focus at the point of intersection of the 2 lines or along one of those lines. This is just a very solid, useful guideline that can quickly turn a stale layout into an interesting one. It's used frequently in photography and in art composition, and it can be used very effectively in digital composition as well. The rule of odds tells us that humans tend to respond better to odd numbers than to even numbers of elements. This is related to symmetry in that even numbers, being divisible by 2, are more boring than odd numbers. For whatever reason, they engage the mind a little bit less. So using odd numbers of items on your page can help add interest to your layout. Implied movement helps keep a user engaged. In one of our other classes, we talked about saccades, that is the small movements of the eye when reading. Saccades happen basically whenever we're looking at anything, and saccades are our eyes taking in all the things. It becomes a shorthand for understanding. By laying out our page with implied movement, we help guide the saccades to the next item of interest that will help carry their narrative of our pages forward. We create implied movement by creating diagonal relationships between the elements of our page, or by incorporating actual imagery of implied movement. Implied movement adds energy and engagement to our designs. So for an example, you could use a photograph of a person's face looking in a specific direction, and that tends to guide people's eyes in the direction that person is looking. People running or having some other action on the screen can also be a way to guide the movement of the eyes towards other elements on the page that you want people to be interested in. And implied movement doesn't always have to be in a diagonal, as demonstrated here. It could be in any pattern on the page that you want people to move. Location. There's a term that has emerged from the newspaper lexicon and has caught hold in web and mobile contexts, in spite of its literal ridiculousness in that context. And that term is below the fold. When newspapers were sold in stands, you had basically the top half of the page to grab people's attention because it was displayed, folded. When designing a news page, you had the whole page open on the screen that you were designing, but you had to be aware of where on that page it would end up being folded so you didn't bury some of your most compelling headlines where no one could see them, because those were main selling points in inducing people to pick up the newspaper and buy it. Notice how I use the rule of thirds here to place those newspapers at a more engaging place on the page. Scrolling has become more ubiquitous in recent years. It used to be that scrolling could not be expected by users. With current mice and trackpad technology, scrolling has become much easier and much more used by people. And so considering scrolling is not as much of an issue. However, many people will not scroll if a design looks complete on the screen. And that's where a designer You might want to introduce affordances that help people see that scrolling is necessary or possible on your page. Things like cutting off content mid-picture or mid-word, or adding animations that suggest scrolling at the bottom of the fold. Now people refer to anything off screen as below the fold, but the fold is not consistent across devices. So digital designers have to be even more thoughtful about where they place the things on the page and where people using their devices will actually see a drop off of the fold. There have also been layouts on screens that have caused parts of the screen to be ignored. For example, the right side of most websites for years was used as a place for advertising to the extent that people began to completely ignore content in that area. Sites that put important information in that location suffered because people simply didn't look. They had developed this sense of that being in place for advertising. They didn't consider the advertising important to them or relevant to them. And so anything else placed in that area began to be ignored, and it became something known as banner blindness. And the same thing with ads across the top of a web page. And so in recent years, people have changed and tried to figure out different ways to introduce advertising into the web layout so that it's more appealing or more looked at, and thus suffering from this idea of banner blindness. As designers, we need to continually understand the perceptions of users and how they engage with websites in general, so that we can structure our pages in the way that is most useful to them in their context. So, with a healthy dose of visual hierarchy principles under our belts, let's look at the concept of wireframes a little bit more. So there are different ways to perform wireframes, but the idea behind a wireframe is that you're creating a rough draft of a layout or a design or an information architecture. And these can be done in various ways. One is with gray boxes on white. Sometimes these are known as block frames as opposed to wireframes. But these are meant to give you a sense of that visual hierarchy, showing where elements on the page would likely be located, where a headline might be, a photograph, a carousel, or text blocks. Using these blocks helps see the visual aspect of the design a little bit more in terms of that visual hierarchy. The traditional way to do wireframes was through just black lines on a white screen. And using words, something known as lorem ipsum is common in the design world, where there's little snippets of Latin text that you can access that just becomes filler text. Ideally, when you're designing, even at the wireframe stage, you would want to design knowing what your content would be. So having the actual content on there could be very helpful. But in many cases, you'll be working with, a content team that may not have the content ready, or they don't know exactly where what is going to be on the page, but they have a sense of what the message should be and what likely elements are to be. So as a designer, you work with what you have. The closer you are to the end content, the better your design and wireframe can be. But it's really just a rough draft to get a sense of how the site will be structured or the application will function. And you use these wireframes to convey that information to stakeholders or to yourself if you're working solo. As I mentioned when we were talking about wireframing with sketching, it's really important to annotate your work. Give yourself a label and an arrow, and writing something, little note to help you remember what it is you're intending with your design at any given point. When you're working with alone, it's super helpful. When you're working with a team, it's imperative that you annotate your wireframes and give clarity to especially any moving elements, anything that would require animation, anything that is potentially unclear or ambiguous. Give it an annotation to help them understand how this wireframe or how this product would end up working based on your wireframe. All right. So now we're going to open Sketch. Before we do, I'm going to share a couple of videos of getting into InVision. So we'll stop the share and share the video. Okay. So InVision app, I'd like you to create an account with InVision. This is a product that allows you to do prototyping. So you enter your email address at envisionapp.com. It's free to create a single project within InVision. So that's what we'll be doing, is using that single product. You can enter your name and information here. Building an interactive prototype is what we're wanting to do. Start using InVision. All right, we'll create our first project. Creating a new prototype. There's other types of projects that you can create in InVision, but for now we'll just be sticking with the prototype. I'm naming it Wireframe project, and we're going to actually make it an iPhone project rather than a desktop. So we'll jump on iPhone and hit next. And it's created the project. And now it's ready to add. Now, one thing we'll be using is the plugin from InVision called Craft. So we want to go ahead and click on that and download it, and we'll be adding it to InVision. Okay. We're done with that vision, and we'll start another video here. This is once the installer is downloaded, double click on it, and it adds the Craft Manager application. You can open that, and then it moves itself to the applications folder, which is handy. Then you'll notice it creates that icon in your toolbar at the top. And clicking on that introduces you to the product a little bit. When we get started, we download the craft tools for Sketch. That's what we'll be using for this class. If you've already got Sketch on your computer, then the next time you launch it, it will work. I have it open, so I'm restarting Sketch, and it will place itself inside of the Sketch application. Sketch launched again. You open a new document, and we can see that in the right-hand column there, Craft has created a little place where the icons for the tool are available. The one we'll be using today is the sync, and we'll go over that in just a minute. All right. We'll stop the video. Now we'll get into Sketch. I'm going to start from scratch here, sharing this video still. I've created a new document typical of other applications. I'm going to stop this share really quick and share that specific window. It'll be easier to see. Sketch Untitled, share that screen. Okay. Hopefully having that will allow you to see the controls a little bit better. All right, the first thing I want to show you is this page area. It automatically starts with one page, and you can tap on it and rename it. So I am going to create a new page and call it Main App. Now using the plus button, I can create a new page, and you notice a sense of natural mapping. Sometimes when you create a new document, it might have a modal window or something that would allow you to give it a new name. But by actually opening the page in the page listing here and then automatically creating it into a text box, we're naturally mapping our renaming experience with the location of that actual page in our hierarchy. So I'm going to name this one create account. So I have a couple of pages for different areas of the application. Just by way of illustration, creating another page, we now have the ability to show you how deleting a page works. I just did a contextual menu, which is by right-clicking on that name, then I can either duplicate or delete the page. Hitting delete, I get a little window saying all layers on this page will also be removed. So this is an example of the heuristic of keeping the driver out of trouble, making sure that they have a way to escape some action that could be detrimental. So I delete that because I don't need it. All right. I'm going to save this document as new example wireframe. Always, it's a wise idea to save your work frequently and often, give it a name. Sketch, fortunately, has the ability to automatically save things as it goes along. And so it's very, very safe in that way that you don't lose your work if your computer crashes for some reason, quite as much as it might have with other products in previous years. But the world is helping users to avoid those mistakes and keep us out of trouble. And so autosave is a super nice feature of this application. Okay, the next thing I want to demonstrate is creating an artboard. In the upper left-hand corner of the sketch screen, you have this plus button, which is indicating something that you're going to add to your page. There's shapes, vectors, which is the ability to draw dot by dot and create a line using a pencil tool to create a more nuanced line. A text tool, an image placement tool, artboard tool, slice tool, and hotspot tool. And then symbols and text styles are available from this menu as well. We're going to start with an artboard. And you notice in this menu on the right-hand side are letters. Those are quick keys. And this talks about that let the driver drive heuristic, where with an advanced user, someone who has to use this frequently, they're going to be familiar with the tools, and giving them a quick key to be able to get to those tools quickly really makes for an efficient experience. But for a new beginner, having this menu here is super helpful. So we're going to start with an artboard, and you'll notice on the right-hand side, the Apple devices show up here. This allows us to very quickly create an artboard that's the size of the device that we're designing for. So I click iPhone 8, and it has given me a screen with the dimensions of 375 pixels by 667 pixels. And so I'm able to start with this screen knowing that whatever I put on this screen will fit within the dimensions of that iPhone. Okay, I want to name this artboard as login, or sorry, create account screen. All right. Now from the insert screen, there's something called symbols, and Sketch actually automatically comes with many iOS UI design symbols that can be very helpful in adding a element of a iOS to your screen very quickly. I'm just going to grab a status bar to illustrate this tool. So I just add this and it's ready for us. There's some controls in the upper right hand corner of the screen that allow us to manipulate the element that is selected. Whenever your element is selected, it has those boxes along the sides to indicate that it's selected. These icons are for alignment, and when you have a single item selected, it will allow you to align it to the artboard. If you have multiple items selected, it will align them to each other, but just a single item will align to the artboard. So I'm going to click the center button and the align to top button. Very handy to use those to get your items aligned. The first thing I'm going to create for this account screen is a name field for someone to enter their name, and then we'll create a password field and then a button for submitting this form. So I use the quick keys for rectangle and then draw a rectangle by clicking and dragging. You can also again use this menu to find some of those things that you may not be familiar with. A rectangle is here. R represents that quick key that I can click in order to get that control. So we have a rectangle that we've created. You'll notice as I drag it around, red lines show up. Those are guides to help you quickly snap to locations on your screen. In this case, because I have just single elements on the page, for the most part, I'm going to want them centered. So by dragging it to the center, those extending red lines show me that that's where it's at. By holding down the Option key, I can see how far it is from elements next to it. So I can see that it's a little bit uneven with 22 pixels on one side and 23 on the other. And I want to make it an even 20. So I'm going to drag that out a little bit and check my measurement again. I'm going to center it and see it's 18, which means I need it to be 4 pixels bigger. Oops. 17 and 16. Oops, I went the wrong direction. Yeah, this is why I shouldn't do math on the fly. So I need to make it 1 pixel to the left to make that 20, and I'll make it 1 pixel wider. 335 makes it 20 and 20. All right. I have my text box about the size I want it. Using these controls on the right-hand side, I can now fill that with a different color, and I can change the color of my border to be a little darker or a little lighter. And I can add a radius, which makes the corners rounded on my text box. I want that to give it a little friendlier feel. So now I have the text box, the shape, and the colors that I want it. So I'm going to move it into position. By holding Shift, I keep it from slipping to the side as I drag it. Now I'm going to add a text field. I'm going to use the quick key of the T for text, and then clicking there makes a text field. I left align it. I change the color of the text. I make it the size I want. I'm going to change it to 16 point and drag it to align with my text field. And this is where I want it to say username. Okay. So because I'm going to create another field just like this for password, I'm going to group these, and these are known as layers. Each item that you create on the page becomes a layer within that artboard. So we can see we have our status bar, the rectangle, and the username are all layers and displayed in this layer field. So I'm going to group these two by doing Command G, and these become a layer with layers inside of it. I'm going to rename this username field. Now, if I click this arrow, it shows what elements are available under this field. So you can still manipulate these individually, but if you click on the whole, when you're clicking on it, it will act as a group or a single layer. Now, I'm going to duplicate this by holding down Option and dragging, holding Shift to keep it in line, and then I'm going to give them 30 pixels in between them. So now I have username field, which is added the word copy on the end of it. And I'm going to rename this password field. Then I have a username and a password field. Now by double clicking on this, I can select this and password. Now I have my two fields. Let's make a button. Another rectangle. Make it about the size that I want. I'll often make the button the same size as my text fields, so 38 pixels. It's 38 pixels. Pulled that off pretty well. I'm going to add rounded corners again to this, keep that sort of soft aesthetic. I'm going to remove the borders from my button, but I'm going to add a shadow so that this helps build affordance. I'm going to remove the blur so that it feels more like a physical, clickable button. All right, now I'm going to add text to this button as well, and I'm going to write submit. I can align these, selecting them both by holding Shift and clicking them. I align them to each other, centered vertically and horizontally. I'm going to group these as well so they become a single entity and rename it button. And I like to center this text because if I don't, if I were to change this label, then it's uncentered. So I change the text alignment to centered. So if I change it now, it will always be centered on that button. Makes it simpler for making changes later on. And since this is a rough draft, it's quite likely that changes will happen. So I'm going to leave it as submit. There's usability reasons that might not be the best word, but for the sake of class, I'm just going to leave it as submit for now. Now this page seems drab and it's a rough draft, so that's okay, but I want to indicate that there's something that would need to be on this page to help give it a little bit of liveliness. So I'm going to create another rectangle to represent an image. I'm going to leave it a darker color just to sort of give it the sense of a contrast. Using the L key for line, I create a line through the corner, and I duplicate it, and then using the rotating tool, I spin it so it's at the other corners. In design circles, a box with an X through it represents an image. So I'm going to group that and write image. Okay. Now you'll notice in the layer field that the order that these are listed in is the order in which they are from a forward to back perspective on the screen. So because the image box is on the top of that list, then it's on top of everything else on the screen. So these are draggable by just tapping or clicking and dragging. You can move them. So I've moved the image to the back. So that I know is my background screen. And you'll notice now that the submit button is the same color as the background. So as a wireframe, I still want to give an indication that this submit button needs to be noticeable. So I'm going to go ahead and go in and change the color of that fill on that button. I'm going to make it a little less dark so we still have some contrast between the button and its shadow. And because the words now are not quite as high in contrast, I'm going to go ahead and make those white and give them a bold state so that we know this needs to be very visible as a button. Okay, so now I'm going to make sure I've saved. I've got a create account screen. Now what I want to do is to create screens that I could use in a click-through prototype. So I want to create screens that are basically different states of this same create account screen. So just like when I duplicated the elements, it created a new artboard and gave it a name of the same name it had before and copy. I'm going to call this user name. You hit the text key and type something. Make it left aligned. Move it into position. And we will double click it to make it active, and I'll write it cool kid 1990. My username. Okay. That's not really my username. It's just a fake one. All right, we're going to duplicate that screen again. And select the text. Duplicate and drag it. So I have a text field there, but with a password that's always masked unless you tell it otherwise. So I'm going to go ahead and just do some bullets in there to represent the password. Now, I could use these screens in my click-through prototype. And once we get into InVision, I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to grab a couple of more screens from a previous design I created to help use this as a click-through prototype. Okay. So now I have a welcome screen where I would come once I had submitted my credentials. And then we have an option screen. I'm going to name that options 1. And another screen we'll name options 2. And this, if you were to click on this menu at the top here, option 1 would take us to this screen. And then if you clicked on this label button or this label here, it would select that. That's what this application is meant to represent. So when you've got screens ready to upload to InVision using Craft, it's as simple as hitting the sync button. It will ask you to log into your InVision account using the same credentials. You select a prototype. A wireframe project is what I've got. And I hit update. And then it's working there. So now I'm going to stop sharing Sketch and we'll start sharing InVision. All right. So you can see the screens that I created are now populated, and you can see that it didn't even need a refresh, and that 6th screen popped up. Now there's different ways of viewing this. Right now I'm in list view. You can also do a screen view so you can actually see each of the screens. These are out of order of the order that I want them in. So you can just click and drag these screens to put them in whatever order you want them in. So now I have this screen ready to do a prototype with. At the bottom, we move into build mode, and that allows us to create hotspots, which will then be clickable elements that will allow someone to come to this prototype and click through it. So I click and drag, then it brings up its contextual menu, select a destination, and I go to the screens that I created, and I know they're all in the order that I wanted. And I'll go to screen username. Hit save. Because the next screen is identical to this screen and we want it to appear like I'm just adding the name in, I'm going to do maintain scroll position after click. So I hit save. By shift and click, it will navigate to that page and I can see, okay, that's the right place it's meant to go. So let's create another hotspot on the password, select the destination, and I forgot to rename that one. It's supposed to be password, but we'll make do, maintain scroll position, hit save, shift click, and I'm on the page I want. Now I'm going to create one for the submit button. I know I want this to go to the welcome screen. I don't need to do the maintain scroll position because this is a new screen I'm going to. So I hit save and hit submit. And I'm on my new page. So from here, the hotspot I want to create is this option button. I go to the option 1 page, maintain scroll position because this is the same screen. Now we have the options. The next one is the label. Select a destination, options 2, maintain scroll position, and there we are. We've gotten through. Now because let's see, because I want to be able to get back to the home screen from here, I'm just going to create a fake hotspot here that someone using the prototype might not notice, but I would know would be there. I'm going to make this the create account screen, and I'll hit save, and that would then bring me back to the beginning again to make it easier to navigate through. All right. So now we're back into the preview mode, and we can see our application. It's within this phone image to help give it a sense of real-world context. Click on username as though I was entering in a username. Click on password, it would put in my password information. Hit submit. We're on the welcome screen. And then option will take us to the options page. And one thing to note that if you click anywhere on one of these screens, if you're not sure what has an active hotspot, you click and it will show it to you. So we hit label and then it's selected. And then I click down here and I can start over the experience. So that's how the Envision prototyping works. That's a really great way to quickly get information out. You can do wireframes very rapidly in Sketch, upload them to Envision very quickly, get them into a prototype format by clicking through the various elements, and you can go to a higher level of fidelity or just keep it very simple. Like you might want to, instead of just putting in the name field, you might want to push up a screen that has a keyboard on it, and you would tap the keyboard and then it would input the name field just to give it a little bit more realistic context. But at any rate, this is a really super awesome tool. Okay, I am going to stop that share and we'll put up the assignment really quick. All right. All right. The assignment for today, day 6, visual hierarchy in wireframes, is to create a wireframe and upload it to Envision. For today's assignment, there are 3 parts. Create a wireframe, upload it to Envision, and then create the click-through functionality, and then share it with me. We create a wireframe using Sketch, create an artboard for at least 3 or 4 screens based on the sketches that you've done from previous assignments. These ideas that you've been developing can now be fleshed out a little bit more and put into this click-through prototype format. Drop the wireframes using Sketch in each of those artboards. Then, when you've created the wireframes, upload them to InVision. First, you need to create your InVision account, create a prototype project in InVision, download the InVision Craft plugin for Sketch, then use Craft to upload your screens to your prototype project. Once it's uploaded, create that click-through functionality, tie together the screens in your prototype with that click-through functionality that I showed you, and then share the project with me, and then profit. So to share, let me go back to InVision really quick. Share that. All right, to share a project, either here at any screen, you can create a share by adding me, Christian at lambdaschool.com, or you can create a public share link as well and copy that. That gets copied to your clipboard and you can share it. When you're sharing from any individual screen, it'll start the prototype on the screen that you're sharing from. So just be aware of that. You can also come to the main page of your project wireframe and hit the share button at the top. It gives you the same menu. You can add me, or you can create a public share link to share with me. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you later on.